Hello and welcome to another interview series with Culture Crafter Consultants. Today I have Vanessa McDonald with me. And before we started recording, I asked her, I'm like, how do I introduce yourself? Because what I find that so many of my colleagues and friends and these fabulous women that I work with are so multidimensional. They run businesses, they are inside companies, they create teams, they create their own products. So Vanessa is one of those people. She's wearing so many hats. She's a CEO of 1MT. That's 1 million transformations.
1 million transforms.
1 million transformations. It's a company that helps entrepreneurs build systems and different business functions. And she calls herself like, I'm a people mover. I build teams. She has a very different perspective because she has been a very young executive and in executive roles both in North America and in Europe. So I'm going to ask you about that. And she also has her own product. She's a courage creator and created the Brave Journal. So all of these things we're going to kind of wave in today. Brave Journal, we're going to link it to your website. All of these things we're going to wave in, and Vanessa and I, like every week, we're going to talk about what creates culture, what creates positive culture, what creates toxic culture, who are the people that shift culture. So I'm so excited. Thank you so much for jumping in and like just playing and recording this call.
For having me.
Yeah. So I don't know, where do you want to start? Like when we talk about culture, maybe let's start with the difference that you've seen between Europe and North America. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Did the culture even exist back then when you were working, right? And the type of companies?
Yeah. So I'm very privileged because I got to work while I grew up in the PR industry. And so I spent time both in multinational PR agencies and London offices of American companies, and then also in a startup. In a multinational French company as well. So I've had the experience of being in different cultural headquartered companies, but within the context of working in London, which predominantly and a little bit in Paris, France as well. So I think I should say that when I was in my career there, I was in the beginning of my career. So I got, I have the employee viewpoint of what it was like to navigate. And I'm very grateful that I started my career in a French company because they're so polite. So I think I learned lessons in face-to-face communication. It's very typical in a French company, in a workplace environment to, at 10 o'clock, you begin the day and you go and shake everyone's hand. At 10 o'clock, there's a coffee. And there was a lot of the meetings would take place around these experiences of face-to-face, going for lunch and those conversations. I mean, I learned to speak French because there was so much of that opportunity in the conversational, even in the particular case of this
company. Was it more personal or business?
It was predominantly business, or I should say predominantly personal engagement, but around business ideas. So I found that allowed me to understand the interpretation of it. And it was a company with a multinational. So you were dealing with offices in Sweden, the office in Australia, the Indian team as well. It was an outsourcing company. So there was a lot of this cross-cultural France with India in particular. So that was a great perception experience. Then later, as I got more senior and I moved and predominantly had senior level positions in North America, I think I came in with I had never worked. I went to high school in Canada, so I had the experience of being educated, but I hadn't actually ever worked until I got into a VP position. That was my first job in Canada. And so I feel like I had years where I might have missed out certain cues. I always felt here I lacked sports knowledge because a lot of business meetings were done around baseball terminology or hockey terminology. That was a real problem for me at the beginning. I don't understand what you mean by pinch hitter in the meeting or this kind of thing.
And that's what we call male dominated cultures.
Yeah. And this was even in PR tends to be a female dominated industry in the leadership position, but that's language still came in and I didn't have any context for it. So I felt very out of my depth in the first few years. And then, when you put your head down and you work, the work speaks for itself, hopefully, and it became less of an issue. But I can't pick one that I prefer. What I appreciated about the work in London was that London is an EMEA headquarters, Europe, Middle East, Africa. So there is always a sensitivity to, okay, how is this information being translated through to multiple different countries at one time? Even from a point of like, can we have a meeting at this time? And that was not the case when I first moved to North America. I think that's changed now. This is a decade ago, but it was very much like, this is what matters and beyond.
We already talked about inclusion, right? And like,
yeah, there was much more of a monoculture experience that was very hard to navigate as, 30-something immigrant into the country who felt like she should know, but didn't. So I definitely had that.
Totally. I love it. I love it. So what do you think in your experience, right? Let's talk about what creates that, and you touched a little bit upon it, what creates that inclusive, effective, and before we recorded, we also talked about a little bit about like happy, like we are this privileged generation. I think we're very privileged. We have choice.
Yes, I totally
agree. If you don't like it, if I'm not happy, I'm out. Like I'm not gonna tolerate it. And there's so many other companies, right? There's this abundance of opportunities.
Yeah, and to give anyone who's listening or watching this context, what we were talking about is, in specific, I was talking about my father who worked for 20 plus years for a company because he had a pension. So his loyalty was to this company because he had this promise at the end of his career that was coming. And of course, for me, that was never the case. So the loyalty was always to me first, in that, okay, what's going to be, I had an understanding that I needed to make as much money in the few years possible and save that, because there was no like golden pot of my coins waiting for me in 30 years. And I think that's been a beautiful thing, that we have put our trust in ourselves, or we had that choice to do that. And it's also a scary thing as well, because we don't have this safety net. We are a little bit less relaxed. And, life, if you look at actually economic numbers, with inflation, our numbers have not gone up in the same way. So we are just generally, things are tighter. People who are even the generation below us can't necessarily buy a house, which is a promise of an American dream potentially that we think is waiting for us.
Right? The securities and like assets.
Yeah. And then how it relates to happy is, I think, and talking about workplace culture as well, when I joined teams over here, and I had teams that I have done in my career a lot of restructuring, and I couldn't necessarily rely on the culture of the company to do so. So I had to rely on my own happiness to set the tone for my team's happiness. And so for me, that is step one in building a culture. It starts with you, and it starts with your own understanding of self. What is important to you? What are valuable to you? How can you convey a little bit of kindness to a group of people to give them the illusion, maybe in some cases, if the company is not the same, that they have a choice? Like, how can you just, and I've been in companies because I've done restructuring and left. And I always say, I leave the company, I don't leave the children, and like in parents of divorce. And so I have continued to stay in touch with, in many cases, with team members, because I think it's come from authentic relationships. Like, I am relating to them as a human and vice versa. And that is the responsibility of a leader in any of those cases.
Take care of your kids in a way. Like, I care about you, maybe not take care, but I care about you. I'm also here, and I'm a huge believer, and I love that you're bringing it up. It's like creating those microcultures. It's really hard when we have, let's say, 500 people to have one collective culture where everyone resonates with the vision, everyone resonates with the values. It's like, it's impossible, right? So inclusivity, I think, to me, and like that sense of like belonging comes, as you said, I have my team, and what does my team stand for? Like, with the context connected to the bigger, right, goals, but it's like my individual team. What are our values? How do we do things around here? What is our vision? How do we want to be with each other? I love that you're bringing that like aspect of like humanity and kindness. So would you say that's what kind of...
Yeah, and this has been true for most of the teams I work with. When I think through the ones that have been successful, the ones that have stayed in touch, is because there was a conscientious moment where the 7-8 people in this small team are like, what are we going to be? Yes, we have work, we have objectives that we are going to deliver, and all of that is true. And we usually like where we are, but we're really staying for each other. And when we've left, or when people have left those smaller teams, it's because they didn't resonate with the smaller culture that was being built. And I think we do. We leave our bosses ultimately. We don't People will stay in a job even if the money is not what they were hoping for, because we want to be happy, we want to feel wanted, we want to feel that we are serving something. And that more often than not is the responsibility of a smaller team leader to convey versus, a giant vision or mission that might be too elusive for, especially in the beginning of a career.
And that's why I think within, right, the culture, when we talked about, and I was all about, like, I've had so many experiences with toxic cultures and being stereotyped and not being hired, or like I love going in and like transforming teams and cultures. And when you work for somebody else, sometimes people don't like that, because we're like, well, let's optimize it. I'm always about like, okay, what can be more effective? And I think the Culture Crafters, right, as a company was created because we said, okay, let's train leaders. Let's train people leaders, because if we can train people leaders, that will create a culture. That's where people will stay. I agree with you. People stay because of good managers, and people leave because of bad managers.
Right.
I hear it so many times with my coaching. They're like, but I love my boss. I don't want to leave my team. I don't want to leave my boss.
We have that loyalty. Yeah. It's just, I think it's human nature.
Right? Yeah, the relationships. Yeah. So what have you seen? I know you've talked about kind of like 3 main points that you said create a culture. You want to speak a little bit about kind of like that?
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier, and I was thinking, what has it been? What are because I've worked in many different types of companies, different countries, and I think there's 3 core things. The first one is connection. And for me, it's connection to self. And it begins with that leader knowing themselves, knowing their own sense of value.
Inner leader, the leader.
That's right. You have to be happy within, so that you can be, if you're someone who is creating a culture of fear because you're upset, it's often because you yourself have a fear, or it's coming to you. So there's a moment for that leader to stop in, check in, and then be able to then set that tone with their team. So that, for me, anytime I've had an amazing boss, they have a really strong sense of their own self, or they know themselves, they like themselves, and you just like them as a result. They become magnetic. And that is like step 1 of the culture. I think 2 is communication. And communication, we talked about an expression that actually in 1MT that we use a lot, which is you cannot get upset or frustrated over uncommunicated expectations. That, when I first heard that, our founder, Zion Kim, says that a lot, that for me changed my whole perception of teams, because most of the time, at the crux of it, someone hasn't said something and someone is frustrated, and that creates resentment and blah, blah, blah.
Assumptions.
And then taking that moment, which is very vulnerable to do, and be like, hey, something's not right. Let's talk about this, and actually communicating with each other, even when it can feel uncomfortable. And that again goes back to the leader that creates a safe space to allow for that, because it can be scary. There, many companies, especially traditional patriarch, I don't want to use that word, but that's what's coming to my head. Hierarchical, that's a better, there is that sense of, if I say something, I'll be fired. If I show that I'm wrong, or I didn't know, and it's
just
actually
suck it up and do your work.
Exactly. And so I really, that's the key. Communication on all levels, but in particularly in a team, when you're having that one-to-one relationship and holding that at the core.
And teaching, I think, people also, right, how to have those conversations, because I think this is where we go into silos. Like, I haven't expressed, I'm frustrated, I don't want to ask you for anything, so I'm just going to do it on my own. And I'm just, as long as I'm doing my work, and I'm just on my own, and then you become, right, excluded from that team. And that's where team starts to kind of like fall apart, the communication.
Yeah. And then the third one for me is fun. And it's really, we were talking about the idea of just the older we get, the more fun we want to have in life. And I think the best times I've had in teams, and when both in a leadership position myself and being part of other people's teams, has been when there's been a sense of fun and lightness. Yes, it's work and we love it, and we spend more time there than we do with our loved ones, but we get to make it fun. And that choice, I don't know if I knew that was available to me earlier in my career. And as I grow in my own career, the more I am always looking for, is this going to be fun? Am I going to enjoy it? And I'm lucky that I have the luxury to ask that question. That is, for me, how you change a culture.
So, but tell me, give me a couple of examples, something you did on a team or were part of the team that was like fun. Because I think a lot of people want to create that. And maybe some managers are like, I don't know. Because I mean, yeah, we talk at every podcast. I'm like, ping pong table, free beer. Again, going and watching sports.
Sure.
But be so careful.
It can be all those little things. It can be something as simple as, you know, what is the beauty I see in you, and actually being a person who can share that with others and make them feel good and let them feel safe.
Yeah.
Then when they feel safe, they can relax and feel fun. Or it can be a more of a planned activity. I know one of the ones I often have reused is, okay, we're all new here. We were in a restructure and the team didn't know me. Some of them were my hire, some of them had been previously there. And there was a little bit of a division in the team. So we did an offsite. And I bought everybody a journal that looked like their personality. And that's one that I've done repeatedly, because it was a bit like, you get to have your dreams and that's yours, that's private. And we get to be a space that holds you in your dreams beyond the dreams of the company. So that created a connection for all of us. And it's like, it cost me, you know, what's a journal? I think for a few bucks for each person. And it was, I think there are ways you can do that where you're allowing. Why I like that activity is it's not forced sports day it's actually allowing an individual within a larger context to be themselves. So there's tons of different ways that can be. It can be like, hey, we're all dressing in burgundy today, or whatever the thing is. But letting the individual be authentically themselves within a group context, that's fun.
So hard to do for a leader, right? It's so hard to do, because what I'm hearing you say, it's like, and I think so many of the new managers, right, are so stressed out about, how do I keep you accountable to your objectives and KPIs while nurturing and respecting that individuality? So it's like this constant pool of company goals and strategies of the company and individual personal development and individuality.
Yeah, I think we overcomplicate it. I think there's one big thing, and I know this has been true for me with the bosses, it's being heard and just taking the time to listen to somebody. Because a lot of us are like, yeah, whatever you're saying, and we have to get through this in the agenda. Like, what happens when you just put the agenda away and just like, who are you, Anya, as a person?
Yeah.
And just allowing someone the space to be heard creates a natural connect. It's a relationship, and from that relationship, sure, then you guys can work together and figure out how this individual is going to get to that objective. But you need to, as a leader, look at that person and not look at them as the resource of whatever manager level they are.
Yeah,
they are a person. So how are they specifically going to filter in and get it done? And they will. That's why they're there. They have some basic.
What happens, right? Yeah, and we've seen like the most vibrant work happens when the person, right, feels like they have a contribution to make. In leadership, we have this kind of concept that 80% relationship, 20% logistics. And the belief is that if you take the time, and that's what, I don't have time to get to know, like I have 20 people, I can't have like one-on-ones with them, right? Because it's like, how we're gonna get the work done here. But we strongly believe that if you take the time to get to know the person, as you said, listen to them, get to know them, what drives them, because every individual is so different, right? Mm-hmm. For managers, getting to know that intrinsic motivation, build that trust and psychological safety, the logistics will take care of themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if I have a relationship with you and I have a context and I have the safety to come in and be like, hey, can you tell me more about why you need this? We won't need to spend as much time micromanaging, as much time creating all the systems, processes, because what we talk about, right? Something goes wrong. We're like, okay, we need to create a whole process around it so that never happens. And then we need to create a whole process around this so that never happens. And then we're so consumed with creating kind of like systems and boxes versus relationships where, as you've mentioned previously, we can just have a conversation and communicate. And that one.
It's as simple as that. And of course, that in that listening, you're also going to hear as a leader, is this the right person in the right seat in my company? So our job in a leadership position is to do that, is to treat the person and you know, ultimately they'll know when they're not the right person in the role, and if they are. And that information is going to only come if you stop talking and you listen to what's in front of you. Is this really the right match? Can I move them to something else in my team, or do they need to move to another team altogether?
Yeah, I love that. So right now, I decided to kind of create a series of interviews. I feel like we have such a maybe once in a lifetime opportunity. I don't know if any generations before us had it, maybe Great Depression, or any generation after us would have this opportunity with pandemic to completely restructure the way we work.
Yeah.
The way we are in the world, the way, like we talked a little bit, you and I, about working from anywhere in the world. Like all of this is happening, right? And I see it both. For a lot of people, it's terrifying and exciting, right? And we're trying to hold like, oh my God, I'm so scared. And oh my God, I'm so excited. So you have an experience of going through restructuring, right? And transformations for so many people coming back now. What do you think? How can they leverage this opportunity to redesign their culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel not 100% equipped to answer that.
Yeah.
Because of course we are in an unprecedented
and nobody
time.
knows. That's the thing.
We don't know.
Let's say you are a team lead now. You have a team, and I know that's not your case because now you're lucky and you can work anywhere in the world. But everyone is coming back.
Yeah.
Like, where would you start?
I got to be honest, it's scary. I actually don't know what I would do, in the sense of what I keep reading. And I think a lot of us are just, people have opened their eyes to this. I'm no longer available for this experience of being in an office if I don't really need to. I don't want to commute and be an hour from my kids and daycare and have to leave early. There's a lot of where people are restructuring their boundaries. If I was to create a culture like this, I would listen to what's in my team and figure out what's possible for the business. Like, do we really need to be in person? Can we be in person only twice a week if that allows people to be happy? And it's ultimately, you have to make the balance of, am I getting the best out of my employee? Because there might be cases, I haven't personally heard of these, where people are better in the office. Okay, great. So then we navigate for that. But most, by and large, if there's a trust in a team, I would think that having them be really happy that they have this circumstance that it might not look the way it did for the last 100 years is probably what you want to do. Keep your team happy to a degree. I think
courage to do that, because they said, like, it's scary because the only way we know how to work is everyone is in the office at 9 o'clock.
The worst thing that can possibly happen is what I feel will happen to a few, maybe more traditional organizations, where they're going to force everybody back in September and have it's going to be a culture shock, because we've now been home for a couple of years, right? So there's this point of people are going to have all kinds of just genuine fears for their health and resurgences and all of that, and be like, I don't know if I want this anymore. We've got used to a different lifestyle. We've got used to closing the Zoom at 5 o'clock and being home and having dinner with our family and all of these things. So I think the best thing a leader can do in this position is really look at their team and go, okay, can we make this work in a way that doesn't look like we had before? And let's design it together, because it's got to work for the organization. It's got to work for the team.
Yeah, totally. And I think those are the conversations that, right, data, like, how can we collect data and see, like, do we still want to have all these meetings? Is it still relevant, or do we keep doing it because that's what we've been doing for the previous 30 years? Is it even effective, right? And as you said, like, there's a bigger, right, the meta view, and then each team as individuals. And the last question I would ask, what do you know, or what have you seen that created toxic culture where people are like, I'm out? Like, what is it?
It's really the opposite of the three things that I conveyed. So, with connection, there's a sense of like, this is a job. I go home at whatever time, and I don't really feel like I'm friendly with you. You don't have to be best friends with everybody, but there's got to be a cordiality of, I know this person as a human and not just as this resource cog.
Yeah. So that is resource. Yeah.
Yeah. And then communication too, same thing. One of the things that, this is true for governments as well, is people hoarding information, because information is privileged. Power. That creates toxic culture. So I have always, with my teams, taken a step over. And I think this has been a key thing, which is, okay, this is the finance. This is what it looks like. This is the annual report that what I can show, I would share so that they have context of the larger picture they're working within. Yeah. It was very toxic. And there were other teams around us who would not have that information. So they're working in a silo. So they feel left out. They feel like they don't understand the context.
They don't see their contribution. Like, how am I contributing to this big goal?
And there's a superiority of like, I have information and you don't. Why? Because I have an extra year of business experience. I just never felt that is dangerous. And then the fun thing is cannot be underestimated. It's nobody wants to work in a miserable environment. You may have to for a period of time, but you don't stick in that culture very long. It's fun, and it doesn't mean carnival fun. It's that fun for the person that they feel seen, they feel heard, they feel part of something more than themselves, or just the ability that they have to give a company. They feel they matter.
Totally. And the opposite, right? And I wrote actually today, I posted something on LinkedIn. I have experience working for a very toxic culture, and it was all fear-based. And I say, like, at some point, people shut down. People cannot, biologically, do their best, most vibrant, amazing work when they're scared.
Yeah. And that can show up from anything from micromanaging to like full on fear-based tactics that people use. I have been very lucky in my career. I've had great bosses, and I've had very few experiences of true toxic culture. And when I've observed that, I got out because I just luckily because I've had so many good experiences, I had the sense that they're out there. So I knew I was going to go find them. So I am lucky that way. But at the same time, I've had a lot of, and I'm having this right now in one of our teams, true trauma that you have to work through from a coaching perspective with a team member who's experienced that, and having them feel a sense of trust again, like can they get over
PTSD, right? PTSD, yes, so that they don't bring that into their next team.
In some cases, it's been the inability to feel the trust because they haven't experienced that, and it actually becomes a problem with you won't be able to get the work done if you don't get them to work through it, or if they are not able or open to it. It's a real problem.
Yeah, totally. And I loved also when you said about the leader knowing themselves and like the toxicity that I think a lot of work, right, that we do with this, I don't know, people leaders, right, team leaders, is that intention and impact. Because as you said, like if you are fearful, especially like you are newly promoted or you come from a different culture, and you haven't worked through your shit, you're going to bring it to the new team. Energy is contagious. Impact is contagious. The intention, like if you haven't unpacked your stuff, right, and you're not very intentional with design and what you bring, I feel like that's where.
The leader sets the tone. So if the leader is having a bad day in any scenario, everybody feels it. People are, whether you believe you're intuitive or not, you sense something's off and you're going to respond in kind, just like we're like animals in that sense. So and as the leader, you have to understand that you have that responsibility. You are setting the mood, you're setting the energy for the team and ultimately for your success. So it's checking in, and if you've got stuff to deal with, you need to deal with it, even if it means hiring extra help, because other people are going to be feeding off whatever is going on in your head.
And I think this is so challenging. As you were speaking, I'm like, we have to create this training. We need to work and create maybe a webinar training on like reading this space and almost like shifting space and energy. Because that is so hard to teach, right? But I think to help leaders really unpack and become aware of what they're bringing into the team, to be aware that even if you're sitting there, you're not saying anything. Sometimes silence can be very toxic and like aggressive and dramatic. And it's like, how do we teach this skill of reading space and like shifting space?
And even if it's just as simple as someone checking and being like, okay, you're also allowed to feel your feelings as a leader. You're feeling like you're having an off day, even being like, I'm having an off day. And I need some time alone, and being able to communicate that to your team so that they don't feel they've done something wrong.
Maybe not the best day to have performance review.
Exactly. it's just having an ultimate responsibility for how you are as a human being in a space that affects other people. They're responsible for you.
Yeah,
That you are responsible for.
Yeah, every leader, everyone in the room, but especially leaders, I find like we are responsible for the way we show up.
I mean, we've seen this in the last year, even on a national level. Like, the leaders are setting the tone for the fear that rolls out around pandemic announcements. It's all starting with the tone over there. How is that person responding? Then the communications, and then
racism, right?
Yeah, we respond in kind to what we're being shown by the person in charge of us, right? So it's a huge responsibility of the leader.
But I'm also aware that you, as a female leader, and you and I, like, I've seen this before, but just so interesting that for you as a female leader, I think we have so much stigma and stereotypes that for us as women to be respected, we need to be very aggressive and we need to match.
For sure. And I think when I started, you mentioned this earlier, and I was a very young VP. Before I hit 30, I hit that title. And then I had huge imposter syndrome around it. So I immediately went into, I have to be like this to behave like that. And what that actually conveyed was, I don't think I was a leader of fear, but I was too serious so people couldn't relate. And that caused huge pain ultimately for me, because I couldn't understand how I could connect. And as I became older and more comfortable in senior leadership roles, I was able to just be more authentically me. And this is probably true for men too, but I talk about it, and I talk about it in my own coaching practice now as embodied leadership. And the more that I am able to be in my own intuition and behave from that space, I observed myself setting the tone for different rooms, and then realized that was how I was able to be like, you're the one who's changing the behavior here. And I'm talking like high level labor negotiations in some cases.
Totally.
And it was just my own behavior. And I thought, okay, this responsibility it starts with you. And you can transmute across a room a really pleasant meeting experience or a work experience or not.
I love how we made a full circle and came back. This feels complete, right? Because when we started and you said connection to yourself, and we made a full circle that yes, when you are connected to yourself, right? When you know who you are as a leader, what you bring into the room, you have that full awareness and emotional intelligence, right? I love how you brought it back. It's like I set the tone in any room I'm in.
Yeah.
Right.
It's radical responsibility. And it's a really beautiful thing when you are aware of that, because you hold it both for your own, because who wants to live an inauthentic life, right? If we have one small, a few bunch of decades together, let's make them the best we can. And so be able to be you're ultimately happier. People are happier around you, and you actually get to interact as yourself. I think in a corporate position, many of us thought we couldn't do that wasn't available to us. So for me, and I do believe it's going to be like, 50 years ago, nobody thought anything of throwing garbage out the window because that was normal. And now, can you imagine that behavior? And it's the same with being authentically you in the workplace. I hope we get to the place where it is absurd, the idea that I can't be me.
Yeah, that I need to fake it and like
present
persona and work so hard to cover up, right, some of my identities.
That's how you get the best out of people, when they are themselves. And it doesn't have to be this like go off entrepreneur, which is I think what a lot of the world is telling us right now. That's not true.
And you can only be yourself when you work in your own business. Like you cannot be yourself in corporate. I agree with you. I left and to be on my own because of toxic culture. And it took me, I think, 5 years to kind of heal from that PTSD and the trauma and say, okay, now I'm ready to go back and actually heal the corporate. It doesn't need to be. You don't need to leave to be happy. There's so much fulfillment and aligned vision and aligned values for people to create amazing, amazing work in the world.
That's right. I agree.
So I'm going to link to your website, to Brave Journal, to Courageous Work. I'm so excited to now we put it out into the space to create this webinar or workshop around space and energy. I think really a lot of people would benefit from that. And I'm so excited to have you be part of Culture Crafters and to lead more trainings in the future.
Thank you. I love working with you. I'm very grateful for you, Anya, and the work you do. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Thank you.